Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you again for yet another Film Fanatic video. It is Thursday at about 10:33. It's a pretty overcast day here in Maine, in the mid-coast. Super foggy, super dark, kind of a rainy day. Very spring-like. Everything is melty, melty. I guess we might be getting some more snow, although probably not a lot on Saturday. So originally they had forecasted originally in the forecast a couple of weeks ago they were saying that this was going to be a nor'easter. But anyway, so we're a few days into spring 2023. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But as of now, the weather has been beautiful. So yeah, again, I want to thank everyone all the great folks out there who have been subscribing to this channel. It's makes me feel great. I love that there's other people out there that are into a lot of these weird movies, and especially me talking and ranting about certain movies. I always love to mix things up with this channel, and I did a special show yesterday on all-time my all-time favorite band, Autechre from England. They're the my favorite group of all time, my favorite band, hands down, and they are just amazing. So I did a specialty show where I just talked about them and kind of my relationship with them. It's a longer video, but it went pretty long. The video, I kind of expected that it would be a longer video than say a lot of the other ones, just because how I'm so connected to their music, to them as artists, and their whole kind of way of operating. They such a huge influence on me, so inspiring. So yeah, check it out. I know a lot of folks know who they are on one hand, like people who are into that style of music, or that style of electronic music, are very, very much into them. But then on the outside of that, they're kind of virtually unknown. It's kind of a funny combination of a profile or of their commercial success. Just amazing. But check out the video. Definitely check out Autechre. They're just an incredible band. I think they have aspects to their music that would appeal to people who are, maybe not really into electronic music, because there's a lot of elements to their music. They have the very ambient quality to their music. They also have very beat heavy. They have I kind of look at them to a degree as a real futurist, modern idea of hip hop. And, along with all of the other genres that are kind of under the electronic music umbrella, house music and breakbeat stuff, jungle, all those kinds of things, trip hop, whatever, what have you. But they have such a range of sound and so many different textures that I think they could, appeal to folks who, might not really be inclined to check out electronic music, just because I feel like they have so many different elements to their music, and it's not they're not at all like one dimensional. They don't put out the same record all the time. I feel like they're a band, and they're definitely artists that really push the envelope and really keep you guessing. I know for me, every time I listen to one of their albums or buy a new album of theirs, it's always a new experience. I always feel like they are always giving you something new and fresh, and kind of giving you this thing of where they're starting from zero again. So it's always this new, I don't know, painting to look at. And I love that about music and art filmmakers, for instance, artists, various artists. I love people who can really give you something different or a lot of variety each time. I love, there's obviously people in certain bands that are out there that for the most part stay within a very, limited capacity of their sound, or they have a template and they're very very good at it, and they can release those albums in that style, release albums in that style and still be good and still be really really fresh. But I naturally always gravitate towards people who and artists that really throw out the rule book, and I feel like Autechre is a great example of that. As far as rock or metal bands that I feel have, um, or, work, they have a very specific thing that they do, and they do it really really well, and they essentially kind of put out the same album or style each time, and they can be really great at it. But I think, sometimes I look at that as the ACDC syndrome. Great classic British band, rock band. One of the most well-known rock bands of all time. And I grew up listening to them. Their early albums I love, and they're a part of our culture. But essentially they've put out the same album for the last, I don't know, 50 years for the most part, in a nutshell. But they're very, very successful at that particular method or way of expressing themselves. Another band that I really love, which is a death metal band, that I think actually has a little bit more variety to their music sometimes. But Cannibal Corpse, for instance, I am a huge Cannibal Corpse fan. That was one of the first death metal bands I got into as a kid, and they released an album last year called Inhuman Harvest, which I think is just an incredible album. I think it's one of their best albums that they've put out in years. It's such an incredible, epic album. But they have a formula. They stay within that formula and they stay within that framework, and they do it really, really well. But I will say that their thing that they're doing, especially on Inhuman Harvest, is they have pushed the boundaries a little bit. I feel like they have injected this new kind of thing in this established sound. So it's not quite the AC/DC syndrome, I think. I think they have a little bit more freshness to a lot of their music, especially the newer stuff that's come out. But they definitely stick to a very specific template or format. But I think that they're incredible at it. A band that I really love, which is more of a kind of experimental indie rock kind of a thing. There's a band called The Liars that I love, and I always tell people about them and try to turn people on to them if they're into bands that have a real edge. And The Liars for me are just amazing. They're one of my favorite bands, and they do the opposite, where they really reinvent themselves each time they put out a record. They always, for me, at least being a fan, and they're a big, huge source of inspiration for me, they really reinvent themselves, I think, with each album, and they throw out essentially the idea of having like a quote unquote rule book of how to go about doing a follow up album. The other artist too that is probably the biggest inspiration for me, that I think really does that or did that better than anyone else, is David Bowie. My favorite and pretty much my most inspirational artist of all time. And David Bowie was a scientist of that. He was notorious for really reinventing himself all the time, always keeping you guessing, always adapting to different changes in music and culture. But at the end of the day, always reinventing himself and always pushing those boundaries. And I love all kinds of music, but naturally, I feel more personally aligned with people like that as far as that perspective when it comes to original content that an artist will be putting out. I'm that same way also with filmmakers. I like filmmakers. I tend to gravitate towards filmmakers that can mix things up, do, go from one genre to the next. And they have a certain style, but they mix things up quite a bit. I just naturally gravitate towards artists and groups that have that way of operating. And I put Autechre in that same category as those as artists that really push boundaries and really reinvent themselves and their sound with each album. So just fabulous. So check out that show if you get a chance. This is a show today I've been really wanting to get to for a while. And I've talked about my relationship to streaming and television shows, especially now where as consumers of media, people who like myself, people who love movies, people who love TV shows and all kinds of things. We're so inundated and there's so much stuff out there to choose from. Literally every day I hear somebody talking about, "Oh, you should check out this new television show. It's really really great. I just watched the first season. It's outstanding." I still hear buzz about certain movies, but I think the focus seems to be mostly, from what I hear, and from in that kind of circle, is about like television shows. And there's so many. There's so many that you can't really even fathom how many television shows that come out now. And I think overall, when I look at the different decades of how people saw content, saw movies, whether they went and rented movies or they would go to a theater or they would, and now you would sit home and watching things through a streaming service or whatnot. And I've always talked about how, I'm very critical about kind of where we are culturally as far as where technology is. But I honestly feel that as complicated as things are that way, and how it to some degree is harder for artists. I almost feel I overall I have the attitude that I feel it's kind of better now than it's ever been. And one of the big examples that I think of that is like I was a kid growing up in the 80s. I was born in the 70s and I grew up in the 80s. And movies that I got into movies when at a really young age, and I grew up on, the VHS era, and that was a real magical time. Always great memories around that. And I always, whenever I buy newer movies, or specifically when I buy movies that I watched when I was a kid, it's always definitely comes out of like a nostalgic kind of a thing. So it always brings me back to certain times in my childhood, and whatnot. But when I think of those movies, when I saw them now, and or when I saw them then compared to now, and the sheer quality and what's available as far as just the overall quality of something, there's no comparison. It's unbelievable. Being able to watch, say an old Lucio, when I, first saw, say for example, my favorite Lucio Fulci movie growing up, The House by the Cemetery. When I saw that as a kid on VHS, it was great, and it was an amazing experience, and it was definitely like one of my introductions to horror. And now, like, fast forward many, many years later, I've seen that movie many times. VHS, I've seen it on cable, like the late night hard television shows that were on, and then eventually seeing it on DVD, and now being able to own it on Blu-ray 4K, and the quality is just ridiculous, amazing, amazing. And to see that, and again, this is just kind of one example, but to see that that's happening and that's a thing, and that there's an audience for it, is amazing to me. And that you can have just a movie that you love to death, and you can get it in this incredible quality, and it's amazing. It's like it's so elevated, and so for just there's again, it's a mixed thing, but just from that perspective, I feel like it's it's kind of the best time if you're a consumer, you know. So anyway, television shows. I have a lot of issues with television shows only because most of the time, I mean, again, there's an incredible amount of television shows out there in the world. I mean, the writing, the direction. I mean, there's so many great TV series out there. But I think most television shows are incredibly long. I have a real hard time, even if it's a show I get really into, if it's on for like 7 or 8 years, 99% of the chance I'm not going to be able to finish it because, on one hand, I don't really have the time, but I don't really have the patience to sit with characters that I really like, even if I really love them, for 10 years or for 5 years. That's one of the things I love about film is it's essentially a short story, and there's a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion, and there's usually some kind of closure, and you can then go on to the next thing. Even within, say, a franchise scenario, there's still that there's an element of closure. You can go on to the next thing, and things get wrapped up, and it doesn't go on for, a, uh, for it doesn't. It's not prolonged for years, and I feel like with TV shows, that's a problem where I get a sense of fatigue, and I get really exhausted and tired after, if it goes beyond, say, 2 or 3 seasons, even if I'm in love with the show. That's happened to me many times. So there's with all the television shows that are out there, because of the sheer length of them, I have barely finished any full seasons of anything. I just it's that thing. How it's that reason, and it's always been a thing for me. Whereas films, it's a totally unique experience, and I never usually get that experience. And that being said, people watch television shows, where they binge TV shows for months on end, or they'll watch, hours upon hours of a television show in, one sitting, which is commonplace now. And yet, it's still a thing that people continually complain that movies are too long, and I always find that that's ridiculous, and I just don't understand that because that's not really where people's habits are. People do watch things for a long, long period of time. And that brings me to today's topic, which is True Detective Season 1. This movie I consider it a movie, even though it's a TV show. For me, it plays out like a movie. And as far as TV, series that do exist, this is totally the exception because this really draws you in to at a to a point that is, I feel like, unparalleled. At least it does for me. And there's a real conclusive ending, and it's not. You can watch. I can watch this series pretty much in one set. It's one viewing, or 2 days. I can pretty much watch this all the way through this whole season with no problem, because for me it's so cohesive. The acting, the story is just so incredibly powerful. Everything about this movie is just, I think, spellbinding, and it just has this magic where it just draws you in and draws me in to where I can just watch it right through, and it feels the way it's shot. On every level, it feels like a movie experience as opposed to a television series. So I don't really equate this as being a TV series, even though it is. I kind of look at this as just a movie that I love to death. And out of, again, like I said in the beginning of the show, there's, a billion TV shows that exist, and every day there's another TV show that comes out. One, and the big thing now is, obviously you have a plethora of all of these streaming services, Disney Plus, Hulu, Netflix, the list goes on and on and on. And now, and I'd say it was probably, it's been a trend. I noticed it. I definitely noticed it happening within the last few years, where now a lot of these companies are not just showing the movies, but they're actually creating their own content. Their own, Hulu, for instance, did the Hellraiser movie last year, and I believe they also did the Predator sequel, Prey, which I really want to see, and I haven't yet. But they've moved more into that direction now, to where they're doing their own productions. Originally, it was where they were just streaming movies, so that's kind of where things have gone. And this was created by HBO, and HBO was the pretty much the first, more or less, cable network that were doing original productions before any other company that I know of. They did The Sopranos, which is one of the first television shows ever that HBO had put out, and in general, one of the first original cable shows. An amazing series. They also did The Wire, which I really love. I just recently bought The Wire on DVD, the full season, and I really enjoy that show too. They did a whole bunch of shows. 6 Feet Under, another one that's really, really great. And again, like I said, and every day I hear about a new television show that's coming out, or somebody that's come out, or somebody's like recommending this kind of a show, or this or that. And I've seen, like, again, I've seen a lot of television shows, but the problems I have around it prevent me from finishing most seasons. But I have to say that season one of True Detective is by far my favorite, even though I don't really look at it as such, but my favorite television show of all time. This show is so mesmerizing. I'm a huge fan of film noir. I'm a huge fan of detective stories, really, really great detective stories. Obviously, a huge fan of horror, being that's my favorite style. I'm also a huge fan of when there's a story that takes place where it follows a series of events in real time. I also love films that use metaphor and symbolism, and also have somewhat of a critique of kind of where we are as a culture, whether it will show different views on, say, the idea of religion, or socio-political things, but it can do it in a real graceful way, not of a heavy-handed way. And huge fan of suspense, and that goes back to being exposed to Hitchcock, and this series has every element of that to at such a high level that it's unlike anything else. It's so incredibly suspenseful, and it's all done. It's all shot. The whole story, the narrative of the story, and the storyline. It's all brought to you in this way of where it's in real time. So you're seeing these characters grow and also develop new ideas, and you see these arcs in their characters, but it's all in real time. And the basic story of this movie and TV series, I even refer to it as a movie, is that it's basically centered on these two police officers in Louisiana that investigate these series of murders. And over time, you realize that these crimes are at a at a massive scope, and that it traces back the crimes themselves trace back many years, 15 to 20 years. And there's also this whole like it kind of unleashes this idea that there's to a degree like this grand conspiracy where it's initially this small thing, but then it becomes this massive thing, and they're essentially lost in the woods trying to find their way out. And again, the thing that I love about this show is that it combines all those elements. It's so incredibly suspenseful. It takes place all in Louisiana. When I was a kid, my brother used to live in New Orleans and Louisiana. He lived there for a long time. And I used to go down, when I was a little kid, I used to go down there quite a bit. And it was all during the time period before Katrina hit. So there were a lot of these strange little towns, but we used to go down, and this would be on the outskirts of the city. And so I used to go down. My brother used to be married to a woman who grew up in Louisiana in this small little, kind of hick town. And we used to go down there, and they were all Cajun. And we used to go down there all the time to visit and have these meals and stay down there. And there was something about going down to Louisiana when I was a kid where it was it meant so many different things to me. On one hand, it was really beautiful. I love hot weather. I love the warm climate. I love good food. The food was always amazing. But it was also an incredibly creepy and mysterious place. Tied into, obviously, the voodoo application, Santeria, and various other kind of alternative beliefs. That was always tied into and is synonymous with Louisiana. There's always and there's also this real seedy element, and also a feeling that you're kind of in the Wild West, where your normal laws and rules and ethics don't really apply there because there's a sense of lawlessness there. And I remember always having that feeling when I was a kid going there, but it was fascinating. And it was always kind of a scary place, but yet beautiful at the same time. Really desolate, especially where we lived, or where my brother lived, which was on the outskirts of the city. And that's one of the reasons I love this show, because it brings me back to my childhood, because this was all shot in Louisiana. And the story itself takes place after Katrina hit. So basically a lot of areas and towns were completely wiped off the map. And lots of people died during Katrina, and lots of people were never found. So the story itself takes place during that time. And every time I watch this series, it brings me back to those memories as a kid of going to this place that was beautiful and kind of scary and very eerie and very mysterious. And I've always had an attraction to that part of the country. So it always brings back memories of that. So there's an area of nostalgia tied to it. And this movie, TV show, completely embodies that spirit or that idea. And this came out. It came out in 2014. It was created by Nic Pizzolatta, who is just an amazing writer. And it stars Matthew McConaughey, of course, Woody Harrelson, Michelle Monaghan, Michael Potts, and Tori Kittles. The cast is just unbelievable. You can't get a better cast than this. Than this. You know, any series or that I know of, or just movies in general. I mean, the characterization and the work that these actors did on this in this show just feels like it almost feels like a documentary. It feels like they're playing real people. They're playing themselves, but they have this sense of like the characterizations that they're portraying. I get the sense that it's like weathered and that they're living. Everything is real. And that goes along with the setting. I mean, everything feels real and it's all lived in, and it has this really the whole overall texture of the show is so gritty, and so there's so much amazing atmosphere. Just incredible. Unlike anything I've ever seen. And the direction for this television show is unlike anything else. It was directed by Kari Jo Fukunaga, who just recently actually directed the last James Bond movie that was starring Daniel Craig. But the direction for this series is just incredible. It just oozes darkness, and it's very erotic. It's very sexy. And it's also so incredibly suspenseful that, and it just like gets under your skin every time I watch it. And it's one of those series where I bought this collection probably about 2 years ago. And before I bought it, I had seen it. I'd rented it a few times, and I'd seen it probably like 2 or 3 times. And each time, I remember just popping it in like it was a movie and just watching it right through. And I bought this a couple of years ago at Bull Moose, and it's really cheap. I got a really good price for it, and it's the whole season. And it's just amazing. And it's got some really great special features. T-Bone Burnett does the score for this. And the music for this show is just amazing. I mean, it crosses so many genres. There's like really dark, atmospheric, almost ambient music to like this real sludgy metal kind of stuff. There's like this real country music that has this real country rock country kind of vibe to it. Just amazing. It was some of the best music ever, I think, conceived, not only for a television show but just in general. T-Bone Barnett, he's an amazing producer, musician in Nashville, has been a iconic figure in the Nashville music scene for years. He's really well known for the Coen Brothers film score for "O Brother Art Thou." That really put him on the map. But he's collaborated with so many artists, so many different artists, and he literally jumps from different genres from all the time. Just an amazing artist. But he did all of the music for this television show, and it's like unbelievable. It's just incredible. And like I said, this show just has such an area of mystery. And for me, like I've been a huge fan of Woody Harrelson most of his career, and I've really, over the years gotten to really become a huge Matthew McConaughey fan. And I think for my money, collectively they've been in some really tremendous movies over the years, and they are really serious actors, especially Woody Harrelson, but Matthew McConaughey also. For me, this is the best thing they've ever done. I just think these guys are those characters on the big screen, And I love that it's it's a crime thriller. It's a mystery. It's got elements of film noir. It's and it has all of these elements where there's this occult aesthetic around it, where they essentially are trying to catch this killer, and you eventually find out that he's kind of known as the King in Yellow. And there's all this symbolism and metaphor, and there's like lots of horror elements in this television show, which I love so much, and I just think it's such a great blending of all of those things, and especially when it's the way the story is laid out in real time. So you're following these characters over a span of like 15 to 20 years, and it's incredible. Not once are you ever like, at least for me, where you're like, okay, I need to, take a break, or maybe this is too long. It's just the pacing, because the pacing itself is actually really slow, but the writing is just so incredibly well done that you can't. Once I start the show, I am glued to my seat. I can't stop watching it. And the King in Yellow, the whole thing of where they tie in who this killer is just amazing. The I came across basically the concept or the idea of the King in Yellow is based on a short story, and I actually remember coming across the original short story quite a few years ago when I was a kid. And all of the literary references in this story, particularly around the killer the serial killer in the story, is all taken from this short story called The King in Yellow, which was written by Robert W. Chambers. And it was published, it came out originally in 1895. And The King in Yellow is a book of short stories by American writer Robert Chambers, first published in 1895. And the book is basically named after a fictional play with the same title, which reoccurs as a motif. And the King in Yellow is referenced as basically this kind of apparition, or this force of evil, and that operates in this city or town that is known as Carcosa. And Carcosa is like the French word for the underworld, and acts as like a metaphor for like some kind of demon or god, some kind of nefarious god that exists in the underworld, and the where he inhabits this place called Carcosa, and that is the French word for like the underworld. And the King in Yellow is this being. He's a power of darkness, power of light, but he's also this very monstrous figure. And I remember as a kid when I first came across this short story, and the short story itself, if you read it, which I highly recommend, is really great. It's very horror based. It's very much in the horror world, but it's incredible. The imagery is just amazing. It always reminded me of like a Lovecraft kind of a thing. But I came across it actually in some of the early writings from Anton LaVey. There's actually a reference of the King in Yellow to the King in Yellow in, I believe it's the Satanic Bible and also the Satanic Rituals. And as a kid reading those books, I was always fascinated by this story, and I remember reading it, looking it up after that, and it was just really like just visually just incredible, like the imagery that it would bring to mind. And that's how I came across it originally. So for this story they created this the killer in this story basically out of this world, and that was the main influence. And it's super interesting because they tie in, all of those the symbolism and metaphor that kind of is tied to, and also what that kind of conjures up. So it has a very occult aesthetic, lots of symbolism, and I've always been a huge fan of that. So it's got all of those things too. Just amazing, just amazing. And this Blu-ray edition is really incredible. Like I said, it's got some really great special features, really great interviews with T-Bone Barnett and the creators of this amazing series. Great interviews with Woody Harrelson and Mathew McConaugh. Just incredible. And the transfer of this on Blu-ray is just amazing. Like the quality is just out of this world. I'm gonna have to watch this again. My favorite television show of all time, and it's got this erotic element, and some of the action in it is just amazing. One thing that I noticed with a lot of television shows now is that there's, and I'm a huge fan of sex and violence like anyone, but there's like what I notice now, that there's an abundance for certain TV shows that have so much sex and so much violence. And a lot of the times I kind of feel, most of the time I feel this way, is that I feel like it's so used, it's so, such a part of so many television shows, and I almost feel like it's used to kind of overcompensate for, maybe because they realize the story isn't as strong, or it's just overly used. And it doesn't, to me now, when I see a lot of television shows that have copious amounts of sex and violence, it doesn't have any effect on me. It's just kind of like, okay, here we go. Here's another scene where someone's getting fucked in the closet, or in the parking lot, or here someone's getting their head cut off. Oh, okay. Or someone's getting, tortured. Okay, here we go again. To me, like, originally those things, would have, they would jar you, and it'd be kind of traumatic watching them, or they'd have an effect. But I feel like there's so many television shows now that use this kind of thing, and I just feel like they're using it because I think in the back of their minds they just don't have enough ingredients to make the story be the selling point, and have those, the sex and violence be a component, not be the centerpiece. I watched a show, I can't even remember what it was recently, and I couldn't even finish it because that I felt like that's what was going on. And it was just like, come on, like, okay, we've seen it. But this show has copious amounts of violence and sex in it, but it's placed so well. There's not an overabundance of it. The story is so well crafted. I think, just from a literary stance, it's a masterwork. And it does have but every time there is elements of where there's violence and there's sex, and there's elements of where there's scenes where it's incredibly disturbing. It really has an impact, and it's kind of shocking because of the story being, first and foremost, being the strongest component of this series. And to me, it's like the definitive definition of masterful writing and masterful craftsmanship from top to bottom, from the cinematography to the direction to the writing to the acting, the just the overall crafting of how this whole thing unfolds. And a lot of people do love this show, but I always, whenever it comes up about, where I talk about TV shows or movies that I love, or I always like tell people that this is my all-time favorite television show. And for that part, for the most part, I consider it a movie, and this is like one of my favorite movies. I can, again, like I said, I can put this in and watch it all the way through, no problem. There's never a sense of fatigue that sets in, and I'm never like, okay, guys, time to wrap it up. Never happens. It's just such an impeccably crafted piece of art. I love this so much. And I was super excited. So when I got this on Blu-ray, it's amazing. This is the best way to see this show. So I can't recommend this enough. The best television show on planet Earth. Season 1, True Detective. Thanks again, everyone out there on the YouTube, or thanks to everyone who inhabit, all the people that inhabit the YouTube universe. And keep the comments coming. And if you like this stuff, please subscribe. And we will see you next time. Peace.